Picture this, a family whose perfect life is a lie. At the center of this lie? A forbidden affair between a man and his niece. But what if this shocking betrayal didn't just stay a secret? What if it led to a death so grisly, so unexpected, that no one could have seen it coming? You see, this isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story that twists, turns, and leads to something far darker than anyone could have imagined. A betrayal so deep that it tore apart the fabric of a family and left a trail of destruction in its wake. The question is, how far can a secret go before it destroys everything in its path? On today's video, we'll uncover the twisted details of how a husband's secret affair with his niece spiraled into a shocking murder. We'll dive deep into the lives of these individuals, peeling back the layers of manipulation, obsession, and deceit. The affair began with a dangerous attraction, but it quickly escalated beyond anyone's control. And trust me, what happens next is going to leave you breathless. But before we dive into this twisted tale, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button if you're ready for a true crime story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Share this video with anyone who loves a good mystery, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories like this one. Now let's begin, because this is where the darkness really starts. But here's the real kicker. This isn't just a story of a forbidden love affair. Oh no. What happened after they were caught is far more horrifying than you could ever imagine. What happens when jealousy, manipulation, and betrayal collide? When someone is pushed too far? The consequences of their actions would not just ruin their lives, but claim an innocent one as well. And that's just the beginning. Stay tuned. This is not just another tale of infidelity. This is a story that will haunt you long after the video ends. In the world we live in, it's easy to create a perfect facade. A family with a beautiful home, well-dressed children, social media posts of family vacations, and smiles for miles. It looks like everything is right where it should be. But what if all of this is just a mirage, a carefully crafted illusion, hiding something far darker underneath? Let's take a look at the family at the heart of this twisted tale. The husband. Let's call him Daniel. A man in his late 30s, well-established in his career, respected by his peers, and seemingly a perfect family man. Beside him, his wife Maria, a woman in her early 30s, beautiful, composed, with the air of someone who has it all figured out. She's the perfect partner for Daniel, sharing in his successes, enjoying a lavish lifestyle, and raising their 2 children with love and attention. But there's a third member of this so-called perfect family, Lena, Daniel's niece, a 22-year-old woman with a captivating beauty, confident and full of life. She was raised by Daniel's brother, but when her parents died in a car accident, Maria and Daniel took her in. She was just a girl looking for stability, for family, and Daniel and Maria provided that. However, what was intended as an act of kindness soon began to spiral out of control. From the outside, everything looked idyllic. Daniel and Maria seemed the picture of a successful, loving couple, and Lena appeared like the ideal niece, well-behaved and supportive. Their home was warm, their family gatherings filled with laughter, but beneath the surface, something didn't add up. For a while, no one noticed the subtle tension in the air. The quiet moments between Daniel and Lena, the lingering stares when no one was watching. It was easy to dismiss. A fleeting glance here, a moment of too much proximity there. But the longer they spent time together, the more it became clear. Something was simmering, something that no one would have expected from a family who seemed so perfect. You might think it's harmless at first. A look here and there, some private jokes shared between uncle and niece. But then you start to notice the little things. The way Daniel's gaze lingers just a bit too long when Lena walks into the room. How there's an awkward silence when the 3 of them are together, as if they're all aware of something unsaid. It's not obvious at first, but if you pay close attention, the clues start to build up, revealing an undeniable truth. Lena, though beautiful, was not yet a woman in the eyes of many. But to Daniel, she was something more, something forbidden. A young woman with the body of a grown adult, but in his eyes, she was an obsession. In the quiet moments, when no one else was around, he would watch her with a mixture of desire and guilt. It was a look that could kill. Maria, the loving wife, was oblivious to this tension. She was caught up in the busy rhythms of their life, raising the kids, running errands, managing the house. She didn't see the stolen glances, the slight smiles exchanged behind closed doors. But she began to notice a shift in Daniel. He became more distant, less present in their conversations, as if his mind was always somewhere else. Still, she dismissed it, attributing it to the pressures of work, the stress of raising children, or maybe just fatigue. What woman doesn't miss the signs of growing discontent in her partner? And what of Lena? She was young, navigating the difficult waters of growing up and trying to understand her place in the world. She was grateful to Daniel and Maria for taking her in, providing her with the safety and love she desperately needed after the loss of her parents. But something in her heart began to stir, something darker. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt toward Daniel, a man who had been like a father figure to her. At first, she resisted. She knew it was wrong, knew it was dangerous. But Daniel's charm, his intense attention, slowly broke down the walls she'd built around herself. She found herself drawn to him, and eventually, she gave in. Their relationship, initially filled with innocent moments of bonding, soon became something else, something neither could control. It wasn't just Daniel's obsession with Lena that was growing. The tension between him and his brother, the one person who should have been his closest confidant, began to fester. Daniel's brother Carlos had always been the more grounded of the two. He was the one who had encouraged Danielle to open his home to Lena when her parents passed away. But Daniel's hidden desires soon pushed Carlos out of the picture, making him less and less a part of the family's daily life. Carlos's absence from their lives would become a key piece in this puzzle, though no one knew it at the time. His departure from the family dynamic, both physically and emotionally, would later serve as the perfect cover for Daniel and Lena's illicit affair. Without Carlos around to watch, Daniel and Lena could act on their growing obsession with each other, in private. And Maria? She began to sense that something was off. The late nights Daniel started to keep, the way he'd always make excuses not to spend time with her. She felt it in her bones. The distance between them was growing, but she couldn't understand why. Was it another woman? Or was it something darker, something far more complicated? But for now, she could only speculate. She was a woman who thought she had everything, a husband who loved her, children who adored her, and the niece she had raised as her own. She had no reason to suspect that the very foundation of her life was crumbling. No reason to think that the man she loved, the father of her children, was hiding a secret so deep, so vile, that it would destroy everything she had ever known. But what everyone didn't know? The husband and the niece were secretly in love, and their affair had just begun. The question is, how long could they keep this dark secret hidden? What happens when two people who are bound by family, but also by forbidden desire, can no longer resist the pull of their emotions? How long before the truth is exposed? And how far will they go to protect their secret? This twisted story is just beginning. Stay tuned, because what comes next will shock you to your core. The question remains, will they keep their dark secret hidden, or will it lead them down a path from which there is no return? It all started so innocently, like so many forbidden affairs do. At first, it was just a glance, nothing more than a passing moment of eye contact. But over time, those glances became lingering stares, and what once was unspoken quickly turned into something more dangerous. A quiet tension began to build between them, and neither of them could ignore it any longer. The husband, a man who had always prided himself on his family, began to notice his niece in a way that unsettled him. She was young, vibrant, and beautiful, qualities he admired, but never allowed himself to entertain. But as the days passed, the line between family and something far darker began to blur. At first, it was subtle, a gentle compliment here, a fleeting touch there. But then, it became something much harder to ignore. He began to spend more time around her, seeking any excuse to be near her. And the more he got to know her, the more he found himself drawn to her in ways that crossed the line between affection and obsession. For the niece, it was different. At first, she felt confused, torn between loyalty to her family and the growing feelings she couldn't deny. He was family, after all. Her uncle, someone who had been there for her since childhood. But as they spent more time together, those innocent moments turned into private exchanges, and those private exchanges turned into something much more intimate. There was a pull she couldn't explain, something magnetic between them that neither of them could resist. She wasn't sure how to handle it. She couldn't speak of it to anyone. Her family, her friends, her uncle had always been so supportive, so loving. But this was something entirely different. And the more she tried to push it away, the stronger it became. But it wasn't just her conflicted emotions that made things complicated. The husband had his own demons, an obsession, if you will, that began to take root in his heart. He justified everything, rationalizing it as if it were normal. In his mind, she was the one who had started it. She was the one who looked at him differently, who initiated the subtle touches, and so he found it easier to dismiss the growing discomfort as just part of life's chaos. What's the harm in a little flirtation? After all, no one knew, and as long as they kept it a secret, there were no consequences, right? But as the affair began to take shape, things only got darker. The husband was no longer content with just small flirtations or stolen glances. He pushed further. He found ways to make her feel as though this affair was something that couldn't be denied, a force that had somehow consumed both of them. The lines between family and lover blurred, and soon he was using every ounce of charm and manipulation he could to make her feel as though she had no choice. She was his. And she was starting to believe it. But what of her emotions? The niece tried to fight it, at least at first. She tried to remind herself that this was wrong, that her uncle was family, and what they were doing wasn't just immoral, it was dangerous. She confided in no one, not even her closest friends. How could she explain it? How could she admit that something had shifted between them, that the man she had always trusted and respected had become the object of her deepest, most forbidden desires? The guilt weighed heavily on her, but she couldn't stop herself. There were moments when their gazes would meet, and it felt as though the world stopped. In those moments, it was only the two of them, trapped in a bubble where nothing else mattered. And the more she tried to push away these feelings, the more intense they became. Eventually she gave in. She told herself it was only temporary, that it wouldn't last, that no one would ever find out. But this wasn't just some passing fantasy. This was something much darker, an obsession that had begun to take over both of them. And soon, the lines between right and wrong would no longer matter. What had started as a secret flirtation would soon turn into a full-blown affair, with consequences neither of them could predict. As the affair deepened, so did their involvement in one another's lives. The husband began to come up with excuses to be alone with her, finding ways to get her away from the family, isolating her in moments where he could ensure their private time. And each time, she allowed it. Each time, he pushed her further, making her feel as though she couldn't escape, as though the affair was her only choice. It wasn't just physical anymore, it was psychological. He was manipulating her, planting seeds of doubt about her own loyalty, her own morals. The affair became a game to him, a game he was determined to win at any cost. For her, the guilt was suffocating. She could feel the weight of her actions with every stolen moment, every kiss that went too far, every secret rendezvous. But she couldn't stop. She was trapped in the web he had spun around her, a web that made her feel both alive and suffocated at the same time. She was falling deeper and deeper into his grasp. And then, one night, everything changed, says Dion J. Because as the affair deepens, something more dangerous begins to simmer beneath the surface. What happens when obsession turns into something darker, something more violent? Hold on, because this is where the real danger begins. As the weeks went by, the affair between the husband and his niece grew more reckless. What began as a secret that they thought they could control, something hidden away from the world, slowly unraveled as their actions became more careless. They made mistakes, left traces of evidence behind, and their world was about to crash down on them. It was subtle at first, small things that went unnoticed, little changes in behavior that raised no alarms. But then, the cracks began to show. The husband's late nights at work grew more frequent, his phone always on silent, and when he returned home, his face was cold, distant. It wasn't the same man she married. The wife began to notice. At first, she dismissed it as the stress of work or personal issues, but as the days dragged on, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut, the strange looks her husband gave her, the whispered conversations in the next room, the growing silence that filled their home. She tried to confront him, but he always brushed her off with excuses. "I'm just tired," he'd say. "I've got a lot on my mind." But the more he tried to cover it up, the more obvious it became to her that something wasn't right. She began watching him closely, tracking his every move. Her suspicions intensified when she found a strange message on his phone, an exchange of words that seemed odd, too intimate, too secretive to be anything normal. It was a cryptic message with no context, but she knew deep down it wasn't something she could ignore. Her husband wasn't just stressed. There was something bigger at play, something that could break their family apart. The niece, on the other hand, found herself spiraling out of control. What started as a dangerous flirtation had turned into an emotional and psychological nightmare. She was plagued by guilt, terrified of what her actions might mean, and yet she felt trapped, caught in a web of lies that she didn't know how to escape. The affair wasn't just a physical secret. It had consumed her mentally, emotionally, and every time she looked at her uncle, a wave of disgust and fear washed over her. She hated herself for what she'd allowed to happen, but she also couldn't stop. Fear was her constant companion now, and guilt seemed to follow her everywhere. Her life, once full of promise and opportunity, now felt like a prison. She found herself avoiding family gatherings, missing events she once would have never dreamed of skipping. When she saw her uncle's number on her phone, a sense of dread washed over her. But she picked up anyway. What could she say? What could she say? The more she tried to push the affair out of her mind, the more it consumed her every waking moment. The wife's suspicions weren't just in her head. They were beginning to build a case of their own. She started watching her husband's movements more carefully. She noticed that his phone was always locked. The messages were deleted quickly, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught a glimpse of a name, her niece's name, on the screen. But she couldn't wrap her mind around it. The name emanated some sort of wonder. How could he betray her like this? How could he do this to their family? And then one night, after her husband had left for what she thought was a business trip, the wife found something that confirmed her worst fear. A note, a simple, innocuous note, written in a careful, deliberate hand. But when she looked closer, the words jumped out at her. "I'm sorry, but I can't stop." Her heart sank. It was a confession. The affair wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was an ongoing, all-consuming affair. But the real shock came when she found the phone records. There it was, a series of late-night calls to an unknown number. A number that matched the niece's. The truth was finally undeniable. And the web of lies they had spun, began to unravel completely. And while the wife began to piece together the truth, the niece found herself spiraling into a downward emotional spiral. The weight of her guilt was suffocating. She knew the affair couldn't stay a secret forever. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And yet, despite the crushing guilt, a part of her still couldn't let go of her uncle. She was scared. She was trapped in a situation of her own making. And now, she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. But the affair wasn't the only secret that would come to light. No, there was something far darker hiding in the shadows, something that neither the wife nor the niece could have ever predicted. The husband had been hiding a secret for years, a secret so deep, so horrifying that it would change everything. But the question remained, what was it? And how would it destroy everything they thought they knew? The affair between the husband and his niece had been simmering beneath the surface for months. What had started as a flirtatious, stolen glance soon blossomed into something more, something dangerous. What had initially seemed like a mere distraction became an all-consuming obsession for the husband. He wasn't just in love with his niece. He was possessed by her, and that love twisted into something darker with every passing day. But as the days wore on, something began to shift. The niece, perhaps sensing the danger, began to distance herself. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and the heavy, suffocating tension between them started to gnaw at her. She had always known this was wrong, but now the weight of it felt unbearable. The affair had gone on for too long, and she started to see how far the obsession had taken him. He wasn't just obsessed with her body anymore. He was fixated on owning her. The husband's jealousy took root quickly. His every thought was consumed by her. Who was she with? Where did she go? Did she think of him when she wasn't with him? These were questions that racked his mind day and night. Every moment they weren't together felt like an eternity. The intense connection that once existed between them began to shift into something ugly, something destructive. The love he once felt for his wife began to wither away as his obsession with his niece deepened. The niece, however, wasn't blind to his growing possessiveness. She tried to pull back, to create distance. But the more she did, the more the husband's obsession grew. It became almost pathological. He couldn't stand the thought of losing her, and the thought of anyone else getting close to her sent him into a fit of rage. His jealousy didn't just manifest in subtle ways. It began to show in his every action, in the way he spoke to her, and in the silent rage simmering beneath the surface. There was no escape. As the niece began to retreat, the husband became desperate. His love was no longer the kind that was gentle or nurturing. It had mutated into something dangerous. He would show up uninvited, trying to force his way into her life, showing up at places she frequented. He would check her phone, invade her privacy, and bombard her with messages, knowing that the more he smothered her, the more she would pull away. He began to see the world in terms of control. His wife, whom he had once promised to cherish, was now just a mere backdrop to his growing obsession. She noticed his withdrawal, the coldness that had begun to seep into their relationship. And then the inevitable happened. She caught him. One evening, while he was in the shower, she walked into his study. She had been feeling an uncomfortable, nagging sense of doubt. For weeks, there had been strange behavior, missing hours, secretive phone calls, the sudden absence of the man she had known for years. She had always trusted him, but the idea that something was off gnawed at her. As she entered his study, her eyes landed on a phone he had carelessly left on the desk. She picked it up. It was there, on the screen of his phone, that she saw something that stopped her cold. Messages between him and the niece. Messages that weren't just friendly, but intimate. The words were charged with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Her heart sank as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The affair wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It had been going on for far longer than she had imagined. The thought of her husband, the man she had trusted with her life, sharing a secret so vile with her niece, was enough to shatter her. She froze. In that moment, she felt as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. What she had suspected for so long was now confirmed. But the worst part? Her mind raced with the haunting realization that this wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about something much darker, something deadly. What was he capable of? She had to confront him. There was no choice. But she wasn't prepared for the chaos that would erupt when she did. And just when the affair seemed like it was about to be exposed, something happens that no one could have predicted. Someone will die. The jealousy inside Marcus had been simmering for months. But it wasn't just a small flicker. It had become a raging fire. For weeks, he had watched his niece, Amara, and his brother, Carlos, exchanging looks, whispers, moments of intimacy that seemed innocent to the outside world. But to Marcus, each smile, each touch felt like a knife in his heart. What had started as a forbidden attraction between a man and his niece had escalated into something far more toxic. Marcus had known all along that Amara was his obsession, but in the quiet corners of his mind, he began to wonder if Carlos was the one who had crossed the line. Was his brother in on it? Had he betrayed him too? Marcus felt betrayed by everyone. The love of his life, the woman he had cherished for years, had become a stranger to him, and his own family had been keeping secrets from him. His mind spun in circles, each thought darker than the last, until one fateful night. It was late. The house was quiet, and the air was thick with tension. Marcus had been drinking, but not enough to dull the rage burning in his chest. Amara had come into the living room, her presence like a spark in dry timber, and Carlos was right behind her, trying to calm things down. But it was too late. Confrontation was inevitable. Marcus's jealousy had reached a breaking point. His mind raced, thoughts overlapping, and before he could think, he stood up, his voice trembling but determined. "What the hell is going on between you two?" he demanded, his eyes darting between Amara and Carlos. The air between them crackled with years of unspoken tension, and in that moment, the world seemed to pause. It was no longer a family. This was a battlefield. Carlos stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable weight of regret. "Marcus, it's not what you think. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. The rage inside him had taken over. He saw red. He saw betrayal. He saw everything slipping through his fingers, and he wasn't going to let it go without a fight. Amara backed away, her eyes wide with fear. She had always known this day would come, the day when the lies would no longer stay hidden. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. The man she once trusted, the man she once loved, had become a stranger. And in a terrifying instant, that stranger made his choice. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, but when Marcus lunged at Carlos, everything changed. There was no turning back. The years of emotional build-up, the festering anger, the quiet bitterness, all of it boiled over in one explosive moment. Carlos tried to defend himself, but he wasn't prepared for Marcus's sudden ferocity. In the chaos, Amara screamed, but it was too late. In that moment, Marcus was no longer just her uncle. He was a man possessed by jealousy, by rage, by the need to control everything slipping away from him. Amara tried to intervene, to stop the madness, but Marcus shoved her aside. Her cry was deafening, but nothing could stop the bloodshed. And then it happened. The final act of betrayal. In a fit of blind rage, Marcus grabbed the nearest object, a heavy vase, and struck Carlos in the head. The force of the blow sent Carlos to the ground, his eyes rolling back into his head. The room fell silent, except for the heavy, ragged breaths of Marcus as he stood over the fallen body of his own brother. Carlos didn't move. The blood pooled around him in a grotesque pool, staining the carpet a dark, viscous red. His life was slipping away, and the one person who could have saved him, his own flesh and blood, had delivered the fatal blow. Amara, her face pale with shock, staggered backward. She had seen violence before, but never like this. Never in her wildest dreams did she think it would be her uncle who would bring about the death of his own brother. The murder itself was horrifying, not just in the brutality of the act, but in the utter finality of it. The man she once trusted with her life had crossed a line that could never be undone. And as the seconds ticked by, Amara realized that there would be no returning to normalcy. Her uncle had made sure of that. What followed was a tense silence, broken only by Marcus's frantic breathing. He had done it, and now there was no way back. His jealousy had become an uncontrollable monster, and it had consumed everything. And Amara was left standing there, alone, paralyzed by fear. Should she call for help? Should she run? But she knew that whatever choice she made, it would never undo what had just happened. In the midst of the chaos, the only thing she could do was survive. But the murder wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a bigger, darker secret. The real question is, who will be the next victim? Was Marcus the only one to blame? Or was there something deeper, something darker at play here? And could Amara, the innocent victim in all of this, be in even more danger than anyone realized? The murder had left the family broken. What once seemed like a picture-perfect life now lay in shambles. The police investigation, with all its twists and turns, started to unravel the layers of deception. But one question loomed large in everyone's mind. How did it all go so terribly wrong? At first, the investigation seemed like a straightforward case of crime of passion. But as the officers dug deeper, the story grew more complicated. A family torn apart by lies, betrayal, and unspoken secrets. They quickly realized the niece, the one who had been the catalyst for this whole tragedy, might know far more than she was letting on. The niece's story was shaky from the start. She claimed to have known nothing about the murder, but investigators couldn't help but feel she was hiding something. Was she an innocent victim of her uncle's obsession, or had she played a more active role in the crime? Could she have been involved in the planning, or was she simply a pawn in his deadly game? As the days passed, new evidence came to light, and the police began to suspect that the husband had planned everything from the beginning. It seemed impossible. How could a man who had everything to lose, whose life seemed perfect, suddenly commit such a horrific act? But then, a breakthrough. A hidden motive began to emerge. A phone message, buried deep within the husband's phone, revealed a shocking conversation with an unknown number. The message, cryptic and chilling, spoke of desperation, of plans, and of a hidden darkness. What did it mean? And more importantly, why had the husband gone to such extreme lengths? As the investigation spiraled, the wife, unaware of the true depth of her husband's affair, found herself caught in a web of lies. She had always trusted him, loved him, but now she was questioning everything. Did she have any idea of the twisted emotions brewing in her husband's heart? Had she been living in the shadow of his secrets all along? It was then that something far more chilling was uncovered. Another piece of the puzzle that would change everything. A letter, hidden in a drawer, tucked beneath old family photos. The letter revealed the deepest truth of all. The husband, in his final moments before the murder, had written a confession, not of guilt, but of a twisted, obsessive love, a love that had consumed him entirely. The letter painted a terrifying picture. It wasn't just about the affair or the niece. It was about something much deeper, an addiction to power, control, and dominance. The man had become obsessed, not only with his niece, but with the feeling of being in complete control of those around him. His wife had no idea. The niece had no idea. And the family? They were just pawns in his game. But the twists didn't stop there. As police pieced together his final days, more shocking details emerged. Was the husband planning to kill the wife as well? Was this part of a larger scheme to take over everything he could control, to rid himself of any obstacles standing in his way. The investigation reached a breaking point. The question of whether the husband was pushed to kill or whether he had always intended to do it remained unanswered for some time. But as the truth came to light, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, revealing the chilling truth. The truth behind the murder is darker than anyone could have imagined. But what if I told you? This isn't the end of the story. The consequences of this affair, this murder, will ripple through generations. And there's more to this twisted tale that no one knows. This horrifying family tragedy is a reminder of the consequences of unchecked obsession, dark secrets, and forbidden love. But as always, the truth comes at a high price. Did you see the final twist coming? If you were shocked, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this twisted tale. And if you want more shocking true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because we have more jaw-dropping content coming your way. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.